Hey guys, welcome back to the Butterfly Effect podcast. I hope you're all doing well. In today's video, we are ranking the Quarry chapters from worst to best. So Jack and I have made our individual ranks, 11 to 1, including the prologue, and we've merged them together, and this is our overall list. So we're going to be doing them on a variety of reasons. Mine kind of, it talks about enjoyment and branching. Jack, how about you?
Yeah, so I've sort of ignored the branching because what I found is when I factored in branching, there was chapters that I didn't enjoy that much that were actually quite sophisticated in that sense. So my ranking was basically sheer enjoyment on my blind playthrough. So if I was to go through the game again and play it in this order from worst to best, it would be like obviously X chapter would be the worst and then all the way up to the best.
So yeah, guys, just so you know, in this ranking, we had a lot of tiebreakers. So Jack and I kind of butted our heads together and kind of just chose which one we actually thought was better than the other ones. So you will see a lot of ties in this. But yeah, like we basically just determined the best ones through a post-conversation. So Jack, I'll let you kick off with our worst of the pile at number 11.
Okay, so in our opinion, the worst chapter of The Quarry is Chapter 8, titled The Belly of the Beast or Out for Blood. So this is the chapter where you're predominantly playing as Laura and Ryan. They team up and they head over to the Hackett house. Now for me, as we've mentioned in previous videos, there is something about post Chapter 7, and I feel like this is partly, as a reason for why I deem it as to be the worst. It really does feel a bit odd how these two are paired together. Like, we've just had a whole chapter of like the bond between Laura and Max. Throughout the entire game, we've had like the bond between Dylan and Ryan, and it's just completely abandoned here. And obviously they've got quite a hostile relationship, but then very quickly it almost comes to a point where they're sort of semi starting to like one another in a potential romantic sense. I don't know if that's just me reading it that way, but it just felt a little bit forced and a little bit out of keeping with what they'd done with the rest of the game. Also as well, how like this chapter seems to shoehorn this sense of like bootlegging that the Hacketts were up to. It just come out of nowhere, and I appreciate they're trying to give a little bit of depth to the Hacketts, but so late on in the game I was just sort of like, why am I looking at it? Like, why am I looking at this? Why is this relevant to the plot at all? In terms of redeeming thing, I think there is the puzzle. The puzzle with like Jacob in the cage. I did struggle with this. There wasn't really a clear indicator as that it was a maths puzzle, but that's on me. But then again, there's all other filler bits in this. You've got like the argument between Travis and Constance, and then again with the whole car approach bit with like Emma, Dylan, Abby, and Caitlin. This can really vary. For me, it was really dry because Emma wasn't infected, so when they approached the car, she just got out. But I will concede that bit could be, better if Emma's infected and then she jumps out as a werewolf. But overall, yeah, it was just quite a bland chapter for me, so that's why I would put it last.
Yeah, I was total agreement. 8th pretty much finishes like bottom for me as well. I mean, I'll start off with the good stuff because there are a few. I thought the caves and cellar were a unique location, and it was a fresh change of scene. The Emma in the van thing, despite the fact I do agree with Jack, it can be bland. I did like the fact that you can have a character die here in Dylan. Pretty interesting. Also in my playthrough, Abby died, and I really liked Halston Sage's acting here of her crying, mourning Abby, which I thought was really effective. And you know what? I really like the acting between Constance and Travis in this scene. But I'm going to speak about all the negatives because there are a load, and there is a heavy reason this finishes bottom for me. I've always said this, but after Chapter 7, The Quarry to me feels like a different writer took over. I'm not a fan of the last third of the game, and I think it all starts, and I think Chapter 8 is the culprit for this. Like Jack said, the whole Ryan being paired with Laura thing just seems completely pointless and unwanted to me. It completely abandons the Ryan and Dylan scenes, and it makes them redundant. And you could argue the same for all the Max Laura scenes as well. I think they easily should have implemented a choice here to kind of allow players to choose who they wanted to go with. So yeah, I did find that whole arc really frustrating. Jack mentioned the breaker puzzle. It was nice that they threw a puzzle in the game, but I did find it quite weak. And if anyone killed Jacob off here because of it, I would get their frustrations. And I do find the choice of letting Laura kill the wolf that ends up being Nick rather weak. We don't have all the info, so it just seems a bit pointless to do so. And we had a Constance cliffhanger mocking the wolf before, so it just seemed a little obvious to me. So yeah, I don't know, guys, but Chapter 8 is just like not the strongest at all by a country mile, even to the point I would argue that I actually hate this chapter. Coming in 10th place to match the number, we have the final chapter, Chapter 10, titled Bricks and Mortar or Final Girl. So I'll start off with the positives again. It is fun to see Max and finally play as Max again. I really enjoyed the opening line where, "Why am I stuck in a tree?" And it's really funny just to see him forced to having to go into those girls' clothing. Pretty funny. I do quite like the final choices with Caleb and the freezer variations. It is really cool that we get that level of variety in the final, final girl battle of the game. There is like really fun credits at the end with the varying songs you can have, and it's nice it ends the game in that podcast. I thought that was pretty sweet. And good and bad here, but there's lots of cool endings, but the fact that the whole game really needs you to have infections to make the endings interesting, which me and Jack didn't, led to bland playthroughs at the end. For example, I had no Max and Laura reunion. Nick, the same for everyone's just abandoned for quite a few chapters to the point you just see him in the post-credits, which I thought was really poor on their part. And also the fact that, Jacob is just crying by himself for me at the end. Like, he didn't get any scenes with Emma, so I just had Jacob crying. That was literally how the story ended. To top that, I thought the Max choice going to the shore or staying on the island was pretty poor, just a bit of a 50-50, nothing with no info, which I'm not really a fan of. People do like it, maybe controversial. I actually thought the Caitlyn chase in the lodge was fairly weak. Nonsensical, had a lot of clumsy moments in it. I felt like the Silas ending was quite disappointing. The fact that it was just a do you want to shoot or do you not want to shoot. I just thought it was a little bit of a disappointing way to end Ryan, Laura and Travis's story, in my opinion.
Yes, for me, guys, honestly, a lot of the same things here. It's quite a lot more negative from my viewpoint. I mean, speaking my playthrough, I'd actually killed quite a lot of the Quarry cast off at this point. So if we're just starting in the lodge, we've got Caitlyn, Dylan, and Emma's the one that's sort of behind the door rolling the silver bullet through, right? But yeah, you think you're comparing it against like the final showdown with like the Wendigos in Until Dawn. It just doesn't hold up. Like Liam said, there's clumsy moments. Sure, there's like choices to hide and run and all this stuff like that, but it didn't feel like a finale to me. And I know there's going to be people that say, "Oh, but the whole Silas thing, that's the true finale." If I'm literally going by my blind playthrough, then I didn't get that at all. It then just sort of cut to the shot where it sort of looks to the sky, and then next thing you know, you got like little cards coming up saying who was alive and stuff. Even if I was to go on the branching, like Liam said, it really is like the main villain of the game, like the wolf that started it all. You're there with a gun and you just shoot it in the back, which is literally what you've done with like basically every other wolf in the game. I was just hoping that there would perhaps be a little bit more of like a showdown, something that would end the game in spectacular fashion. So yeah, unfortunately, chapter 10, it just didn't hit the mark for me, and it was one of the reasons why I feel like Quarry, it started off really well, but it then just hit a bit of it sort of fell off at a certain point, and it never really recovered. Okay, so in 9th place, me and Liam have got Chapter 5 titled White Noise. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to get the positives first, because in my personal ranking, this was a little bit higher than where it finished. For the reason being that I actually really do like the scene with Dylan and Ryan in the Radio Shack bit. I thought there were some great comedic moments there, like the performance of the guy who plays Dylan, I forgot his name, it's Miles something. Really, really strong, and I feel like his character really was. This was the point where I really started to like Dylan's character, and perhaps started to go against Ryan quite a bit actually. But there's some really great moments there, where you think with the chainsaw, the cutting off of the arm, there's good variety there. I know in my blind playthrough I did just cut off the arm. Ultimately, what did bring this chapter down for me is the fact that of another scene in this chapter, which I do deem to be the worst in the game. And that's the bit where you're playing as Caitlyn. Now, obviously, you're looking at characters here where you've got Caitlyn, Abby, and Nick. Now, in terms of character I'm invested in, I was only really invested in Abby as a character out of these three in this particular bit. because me and Liam have said this countless times in the past, but like we trusted the Hacketts from the get-go. So like I remember in my blind playthrough playing this, and I was like purposely like, you know, just ballsing up QTEs. I wanted to get like the blood stuff on my face, which really just did take the drama out of it all. And you know, even like when the bit you got afterwards where like Nick then attacks Bobby, you sort of get the feeling that nothing's really going to come of it, and it is just sort of a fairly linear chapter. So that's basically what mostly pulled chapter 5 down. And then of course, obviously going forward again, we do have the ending where we see Kaylee Hackett get shot by a girl wearing an eye patch, and then it cuts to black. And so I mean, it sort of felt okay. Like it wasn't great, it wasn't bad, but do you know what I mean? Like it just, the whole thing with chapter 5, I was just thinking, yeah, like it wasn't brilliant.
Chapter 5, for me, I actually ranked it complete bottom. I'm not a fan of this chapter whatsoever. Jack hits the nail on the head. I absolutely hated the Caitlyn scene. I myself decided to succeed all the QTEs, but I felt like, why am I doing this? I trusted the Hacketts, and it's really frustrating that if you trust the Hacketts, you still can't trust them or kind of align with them in some shape or form. So yeah, no, I just wasn't a fan of it. Like weaving and dodging around Bobby just felt a little pointless to me. Like Jack said as well, the Kaylee scene at the end, I wasn't really a fan of either. It just felt really rushed. I clocked it was Laura, and although it's cool that we don't get like an instant conclusion, it kind of draws itself out a little bit. It just all happens in a snap second, and it's just really confusing and murky. Maybe that's really nitpicky for me, but I just didn't like it. And, you know, I have to almost disagree with Jack, actually, but it's just a complete sort of like, you know, whatever your flavour is, really. But I wasn't a fan of the shack scene. The whole thing of, like, Ryan being, like, rude to Dylan, how clumsy he is that he doesn't clock, like, the wolf outside and nearly gets Dylan killed. And then, I don't know, to me, it just felt like a little bit of a Until Dawn copy and paste job where they put a radio scene in, an amputation scene. So it just didn't feel very fresh to me. It felt like something I'd already seen in Until Dawn. So I came down really harshly on chapter 5. Okay, coming in at 8th spot, we have chapter number 6, which is titled Prayers by Night. So I'll start with the positives. I found the Jacob scenes really humorous, like the way he runs away and kind of messes about with Emma. What's cool as well is that in my scene, because I trusted Bobby in like a few earlier chapters, I got blood on my face. And I actually failed at hiding in the bushes. So the wolf clocked me, but nothing happened. So, you know, there is, you know, a fair bit of branching and variety in the Quarry, and it was cool that despite my very bland blind playthrough, I did get that, which I was a big fan of. I like the fact that you see, like, the effects of, like, you know, Nick turning into wolf form, how he starts changing his behaviour, getting angry. It's fairly tense, and I did actually really enjoy that. And the whole thing about Emma and the car causes branching, which, you know, I have to praise. Where I came down quite harshly on chapter 6 is the Abby death felt really cruel. Not only do people complain about how there is a big glitch here and they get her killed when they don't want her to, but it just kind of challenges that whole thing that Supermassive Games have taught us about how not to mess with nature, and then in this one you have to. It does seem a little nonsensical to me that we have to shoot someone who's still in human form, so you really wouldn't understand that, despite the fact that you don't have silver, that a gunshot wouldn't kill the guy. I felt it was a little harsh, and I can understand why people such as myself feel a little aggrieved that we lost Abby in that scene. Emma gets a giant walk scene, but I don't know, it's a little fillery to me and a little bland. There's no one to talk to, there's lots of empty space. And again, when you want to trust the Hacketts, it's frustrating that you have to kind of hide from them. And the last point I have for why I wasn't a fan of this chapter to an extent is just the fact that I thought Laura's comeback was really weak. It would have been cool if there was some really cool reveal that it was Laura, but we literally just get a knock on the door and her explaining it. And like, again, a little bit of a copy and paste job from Until Dawn, from how the stranger came in and had to lore dump you, which I wasn't really a big fan of.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as for me, like, chapter 6, I mean, obviously it finished higher than the others. I feel like that's because that the others always had something a bit worse going on. I'm not going to say that chapter 6 is brilliant, though. So, like, when you think about this chapter, you're basically playing Jacob, you're wandering through the woods, right? You can have a little bit of a moment with Emma when the werewolf chases you. And I think, like I say, I'm basing this on my blind playthrough, but the QTEs in the Quarry are so easy. So like I never had that situation of jeopardy where like I'm hiding in the bush because obviously I trusted Bobby earlier, but also with like the little bear trap things, I wasn't in danger of that. So it was very much then I just fell on the ground, and I think then like Jedediah just comes and picks you up, and then that's basically Jacob like out for the game for the most part, isn't it? The highlight really is Nick turning into a werewolf. And obviously this was the point in the game where I registered my first death in Abby, which at the time was like, no, like, it's always the character that I like the most always seems to die first. But nonetheless, it's quite a nice little scene. And then yeah, honestly, like Liam said, like beyond that, it's just sort of Emma walking around the camp. You know, she does encounter the Hacketts, but again, she just sort of runs off and then ends up in the car. And I sort of wish at this point that Emma perhaps was infected, you know. And then yeah, like Laura just arriving at the pool house, it's sort of like here's some exposition ready for the next chapter. So like it wasn't highly eventful, but there was nothing that sort of perhaps offended me is the wrong word, but it's just like there's nothing like absolutely terrible in here that made me want to put it any lower. Okay, so finishing 7th, we have the prologue. And you know what, going back through this prologue again, I did really enjoy it, and it took me back to my blind playthrough, and it's just that sense of adventure. It's night time. I feel like a big plus of this as well is the introduction of Travis. I've lauded Travis's character throughout every Quarry video, it seems. I just feel like the delivery of the lines, the facial animations of Ted Raimi are absolutely spot on. You really don't know whether this guy is going to help or hinder you. There is that sense of inevitability that they're always going to go to Hackett's Quarry, which is a little bit of a negative, but if I am just focused on just my sheer enjoyment, there's lots to like about this. You really start to get the dynamic between Laura and Max early doors. But I don't think that you've actually, maybe in Supermassive Games history, whether they've actually sold a relationship between two people as quickly as they have with Laura and Max. And then just going beyond that, there's just a nice bit of action where Max gets attacked. Obviously you get the choice, and there's a really nice cliffhanger with, you know, Travis sticking the needle in Laura's neck, and then it cuts to the credits. So overall, I actually quite enjoyed the prologue, but there's just other things that bettered it for me.
Yeah, for me, I guess, you know, the prologue is very strong to set up the game in the Quarry. Like, it really sets the tone for the game. And as Jack mentioned, the relationship between Max and Laura are absolutely brilliant. I really bought into them as characters. You really get the impression that they've got, like, a long history together, and they're a really, like, kind of happy and healthy relationship, which is really cool. They've got differences and quirks. So I really enjoyed it. The horror in this bit is probably the best bit in the game in terms of, like, you know, a horror factor, because at the end of the day it is a horror game and you have to rank it on that. A little bit of a downfall though, I guess the horror just doesn't get matched. It's quite creepy when you step out the car and you're Laura, and then you kind of hear the whispers between the trees and stuff, and you see that figure in the shadows. It just never comes to that height again, and I just found that a little disappointing. And I guess the fact the prologue's always going to struggle to compete with other chapters because there's just not enough meat on the bones in the story yet. So it just, yeah, doesn't have the capability to hit higher rank, but still very strong. Another thing I kind of have to say as well, and I don't know if it's too harsh to say this, but something that's actually freshly popped into my head is the fact that we were given video footage for the prologue super early in advance as a teaser, which is fairly cool, you could argue. But when I played the game in my blind playthrough, having seen it, I knew what was coming, and it definitely took, you know, a bit of sting out of the enjoyment for me. Okay, so guys, in 6th place, we have the flashback chapter, number 7, The Past Behind Us. Now, as you can see the top corners, this is probably the chapter where Jack and I had the sort of biggest disagreement on. I actually put it 3rd, you know. I actually really enjoyed this chapter. I just want to say that I think it's quite daring that they went for this. We've not really ever seen it where usually prologue people are fodder. They just die in the prologue and then you don't see them again. But with this, they actually decided not only to kind of like really explore what happened after the prologue, but they gave us a whole chapter dedicated to them. It was a really nice way to kind of break, you know, the pace a little bit. and just explain what Laura and Max got up to, which I really thought was cool and daring. It was something different. So yeah, also, it's just the fact that Ted Raimi's acting absolutely crushes it. His performance is such a highlight in The Quarry for me. And Jack mentioned how good his performance was in the prologue. He doesn't leave it at the door there. He brings it straight back to in chapter 7, and he's fantastic. I absolutely love the score in this whole chapter as well. One of my favourite songs is the one where, Laura comes out after getting scratched in her eye, and then she has to patch herself up, and then her own song, because Siobhan Williams is a really talented singer, she gets her own song backing her, and it just fits the scene very well. Laura and Max's dialogue is spot on as well. Absolutely love it. There's that whole bit of Laura telling Max about how she found out, he didn't get to college, and then they have like a really endearing scene, which is really nice. There's cool variation in this chapter as well between Laura and Travis of like them they can either build a connection together and trust, or they can hate each other's guts and try to murder one another. Really cool variation. We get a really nice, Constance cliffhanger as well with Jacob, which I really appreciate. The one downfall I have of this chapter, I guess, is just the fact that there's that little puzzle section to break into the computer. Despite the fact it's cool that we get to walk around out the cell a little bit, I did find this puzzle a little bit tedious because we've got this giant building and we're trying to find a few clues, and it's just a little tedious trying to find the evidence you need for the password.
Yeah, see, for me, again, if I'm basing this on my blind playthrough, because I feel like if I wasn't, this could potentially be lower chapter 7 for me. If I'm based on my blind playthrough, I did see it as a welcome change at the time. We've become accustomed to, whether it's the Dark Pictures or even Until Dawn, the Prologue characters, they serve a purpose, and that's it, isn't it? But what the Quarry does is it brings the Prologue characters back and even gives them a lot more depth than what we're accustomed to with normal characters, you could even argue. So at the time, I was really appreciating this. And again, the conversations and the scheming to try and win Travis round, I thought that was really cool. Even the moments when you do get out of the jail cell and you're able to explore, there's a little bit of investigating and a little bit of trying to figuring out what the situation is. And of course there is the reveal, obviously we knew what it was, but the reveal that the Hackett's, Chris is a werewolf and they're all tied up to, try and find this other werewolf. So that's good. I think what does pull it down though, and it becomes worse when you do replays, but I think I did notice it a little bit in my blind playthrough, but sometimes the dialogue scenes can drag on quite a bit. There's some juicy moments in there, but then there's other times when you really feel like you are in a prison. You really feel like you can't move anywhere. And it's a little bit of a slog to try and get through these bits of dialogue just to get to a point, you can move around and do stuff, So overall, it was a bold thing for Supermassive to do. I'm glad they did it. But I don't know, like I say, I feel like there's other aspects of the game that just performed better in terms of just what captured my engagement. Okay, so the next 3 chaps in this list, we did actually have even marks across the board. So what me and Liam had to do was do a little mini debate to try and work out, what would fit where in the list. And we actually come to chapter 4 next, which is titled Don't Panic or Breath of Fresh Air. So for me, it's this chapter where the highlight is the Emma treehouse chase. Now, you know me, I'm a sucker for some action. I'm a sucker just for chase sequences in these games. It gets the adrenaline pumping. You've got to keep focused for QTEs. The werewolf is fully revealed at this point, and you really see the threat it poses. As one of the negatives though, it does feel a little bit unrealistic, the fact that when the werewolf drops down, Emma can take a picture of it, if it's trying to do this sort of gritty horror situation. I know they try and embed it later on in the game that taking evidence is important, but in that situation you're not going to do that, are you? You're going to just leg it straight away. But to its credit, it's a decent chase sequence, and you can get a nice zip line ending. So, it's not the worst thing. As far as other things in the chapter, not much happens. Obviously, it starts off with Nick with his injuries. They're really trying to work out whether this is an infection and how quick it's going to get through his system. Jacob can turn up, which can lead to nice back and forth between him and Ryan with regards to the safety of Emma and the safety of the others and who has the gun, etc. So there's some good character moments. And then beyond that, it's really just sort of Dylan and Ryan looking around to get help from the others. So I feel like what really carries this is perhaps the Emma chase. But other than that, it's, again, we're starting to get into the areas of the game where it will start to get better, and I feel like maybe this is the slight turning point, maybe the next one, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think Jack hits the nail on the head with a lot of his points there. So Emma completely carries this chapter. Halston Sage's acting, I said it before, but really good. I really like that vlog dynamic she has when she's on the island. It was just a really fresh kind of change of scene and style of like carrying out a chapter, to be honest, as she kind of vents her frustrations about Jacob. The zip wire scene as well is really cool. It's a really awesome chase scene. One downfall, I guess, is you could say, like, she does get quite an unforgiving choice where you can get killed instantly if you don't look in a bag first. I've seen a bunch of people kill Emma that way. Little unfair, you could argue. I'd also argue that the island's a little empty. You get the choice about whether you go upstairs or down under, and all you can find is a little fire pit. It drags on for quite a while, and I just found the island a little tedious when we go away from Emma's vlogging stuff. The only other positive I really have for this is I think this was the chapter where it felt like a turning point for Dylan for me. I found his lines really hilarious, where he says things like, "That's what they want you to think, man. Why does everyone blame it on bears?" And I couldn't help but laugh when he has the gun and then he goes around the corners trying to be like an army person. I found that hilarious. I found Dylan maybe a little unfunny at the start, and this was the turning point for me that made him one of my favourite characters. So guys, in fourth place, just missing out on a medal, is Chapter 1, Hackett's Quarry Forever. I guess this is just the start of the game, so we're not really in the meat of the story. There's no nitty-gritty or anything yet, so your objectives are quite weak. It's things like helping Caitlin with her bags, get to the buggy with Emma, so you can't really rate it highly in terms of a story point of view. But I love the exploration and the locations. You know, the bit where you're like Abby and you're sat on the stairs and there's just that like view of like the sun shining through the trees. It's at that early stage where you're really excited to get stuck into the game, and you really feel it in Chapter 1, so it like ranks really highly. It introduces us to the counsellors in a really great manner as well, where I just was really sold by a lot of the believable characters. It was a really fresh way to introduce a lot of them. Emma and Abby's buggy conversation's quite interesting as well, so usually these chapters have quite a tough time introducing them and making them all likable, but I think the Quarry does it really well. I think it introduces the game to a T. So yeah, like Chapter 1 did very well on my list.
Yeah, so for me, we're really getting, in terms of my list, we're really starting to get into the point now where I'm starting to see a lot more positives, and I really, really like Chapter 1. I feel like it just lays the foundation so well, especially where you've just had that ending from that prologue, with like the syringe in the neck. That there's a horror element to the game. I know most people don't, but I then really like the contrast of how Chapter 1 starts with like the feel-good music. They're waving off, obviously the people that were at the camp, and you get the sense that there is some camaraderie between them. There's like a nice bit of back and forth between Jacob and Caitlin. And of course, they're talking about the whole situation with Emma. So again, it's like laying down the groundwork for things that could come to pass later on in the game. I think there's other characters as well that were brought into the fold, like Nick and Dylan. While they didn't get as much airtime, you're just getting a flavour for who they are, which I thought was quite good. But honestly, one of my favourite scenes in the entire game is perhaps the bit where you're playing as Abby. The location is just absolutely beautiful. Like the graphics, like, it's superb. Like the big tree in the middle, you've got the lodges round the edge. And I just remember when I first played it, like I felt like I had all the time in the world. I didn't want to rush. I want to really explore this environment thoroughly before obviously Abby goes and meets Emma and they go off in the little cart thing. And even beyond after that, like they can have some nice moments as well, which again lays down the foundations for like the conflict in Chapter 2 with like the truth or dare situation, because the two girls are talking about Nick and what Abby's going to do to try and advance things, Even beyond that, you've then got like the eavesdropping from Ryan on like Mr. Hackett. So like really Chapter 1 is just like laying down the foundations. It's just sowing the seeds for like aspects of the plot. But I think the way it was paced, I think the different locations that you got, and of course there is a nice little cliffhanger at the end where you see the Hacketts start to show that it's hunting season. yeah, I thought honestly chapter 1 was a really solid start. Okay, so taking the bronze medal, we have chapter 3, Trouble in Paradise. Now, of course, everyone's going to know this chapter. This is where the events of the game really start to take fold. And to be honest, I'm surprised with like how they did it. But straight off the bat, you're playing as Abby and Nick, and you get ambushed by the werewolf. I really enjoyed this, my blind playthrough. It felt like it was the first time in the game where there was real stakes. Like there was potential for obviously Nick to die, the potential for Abby to die. There's some nice variation. Do you climb the tree? Do you crawl through the log? You're introduced to a new QTE as well, or like, you know, little mini game with like the don't breathe. And I was just like, yeah, like this is the horror that I was sort of like really hoping for, like when I first come into it, because like I said previously, we've had all the nice feel good stuff, the getting to know the characters. Now let's get into the meat of the bones of the game, you know? So yeah, moving on. So obviously after the events of that Truth or Dare, we then have some really nice character moments between Jacob and Emma. And again, I really like the relationship between these two. Of course, it is frosty, but that's what I quite like. It's very believable, and you can almost arguably empathise with like both characters in this situation, which makes it very grey. There are some moments where it's very serious, but then they do have like flirty moments as well when they're like messing about in the water. And again, like I said in the previous chapter, location's absolutely gorgeous. Like the design on this thing, like this, why the locations I think are so amazing in this game. The design on them is absolutely brilliant. And then of course it can, you know, as far as choices go, it can like go a couple of ways as well. And then moving on beyond there, you've got like the Ryan chasing after Nick scene. Again, it's a bit of action. It keeps you thinking with like the QTEs and such. And then of course we have the ending where like Jacob can like encounter Bobby by hanging around. So like literally so like I wouldn't say it was like absolutely top tier of like the Quarry, but this is like, yeah, we're getting into that part now where I'm starting to not really see many negatives in terms of like my enjoyment in my blind playthrough.
Chapter 3 is an absolutely solid chapter. I also really liked the Emma and Jacob Pierce scene. I just think it's fantastic. Halston Sage and Zach Tinker do such an incredible job at their performance. It gives them that extra layer and dimension that their characters really needed. And it's why they're two of my favourite characters in the game, and I think this Pierce scene's strongly responsible for that. It also has the first potential death, which I think's pretty cool. Until Dawn didn't give us her first death till chapter 4. The Quarry, you can get one in chapter 3. Although it's a pretty clumsy Jacob drown sequence, I still find it really cool that we can get it this early. Where I come down hard on this chapter, I guess, although it is really nitpicky, is that I found the Ryan chase a little weak, and not much variation can happen from it. And I constantly mention how frustrated I was that, in my opinion, the Hackett's were good, and it's frustrating that we can't trust them. It's really at this point where you can kind of go against them, and my frustrations grew from this point. So I do have to point that out. But still, regardless, Chapter 3, very worthy of the bronze medal. And guys, before I tell you who our silver medal is out of Chapter 2 and Chapter 9, I will say that Jack and I put one gold and the other one silver, vice versa. So these two were tied, and it came down to a post-conversation. So without further ado, getting the silver medal is Chapter 9, The Matriarch / Thicker Than Water. Now, I've read a lot of forums online and stuff that say that this is their favourite chapter, so it might be a controversial one for you, but hear us out and then you might understand why. So I'll come with everything I love about this chapter. Firstly, I love the Hackett house. It's such a creepy setting. It's a really nice change of location. When you're Laura and Ryan sneaking around the house, I did feel an air of tension and horror to it, and I have to praise it. It's got the Constance death, which is hands down the best death in the game. It's so gory and graphic and out the blue. It's such a memorable kill to me, and I think that merits some respect. It also has the scrapyard action and horror scene, which is my favourite chapter in the game. Hands down, I just think that whole horror sequence of the lights flashing on as Dylan's in the top of the crane, just so cool. I'm always going to remember that scene as my best from the Quarry. The Ryan stab and bite variations are really cool. A lot can come out from this, and I think it merits, praise there as well. It's got the funny Bobby line, where he, like it's just a giant child inside, and despite the fact that maybe it takes the sting out of the horror element, I still really enjoyed it. And at the end, you get the really epic, Chris Hackett shot. There's lots of variation here, despite the glitch that I had when I had it, which can really fork the end of how your chapter 10 plays out, for better or worse. Now, where we come down negative on this chapter, Eliza gets massively shoehorned in the plot. I think Jack speaks about it better, so I might hold my tongue a little bit more on it, but I wasn't really a fan of how Eliza gets incorporated in this game as this narrator and then just gets fleshed in. It's nowhere near in the same level as how Dr. Hill was, in my opinion. Not even close. Another thing that I do have to criticise is that I do think Emma's scene in the basement is a little fillery where nothing much happens. It's almost just a little ploy to find the card Eliza wants you to find for her thing. The Jedediah fight is really weak as well, with the easiest QuickTime events, and it would have been nicer to have a bit of a cooler sequence there. And my other negative thing as well is just the fact that despite I love the scrapyard action scene, the scrapyard walking scene beforehand is so incredibly dull and weak, where you're just Dylan and Caitlin walking through. There are some cool dialogue moments, but it's such a giant location with not much. There's not even that many clues or collectibles you can find. I just found it really dull and empty, and I found it really frustrating that I scoured every corner and there isn't all that much to find. So it just would have been cool if they gave us a few more Easter eggs, a few more collectibles, a few more dialogue moments than we got. And I think as well, so as you can see, I actually gave this one the gold one, and I swayed Jack's way in the end. Jack was pretty convincing as to why Chapter 2 does take the gold medal here. And I do think another reason I eventually caved and went Jack's way is because I don't think this chapter is helped by the fact it is sandwiched between two of the weaker chapters. We've already told you why we weren't big fans of Chapter 8 and 10. I think Chapter 9 is almost on the back end of the Quarry, which is the weakest part of the Quarry. And I feel Chapter 2 probably has the benefit that it's kind of in the early days of the excitement of getting into the game, while Chapter 9 is at a point where there are some flatline moments, and my enthusiasm was a little dwindled at this point.
So yeah, as for me, like talking about my personal list, I guess like if I was basing this on choices as well, then I feel like Chapter 9 would come up on top, because there's some nice variation here that can go into Chapter 10, but based on my blind playthrough, like, obviously, yeah, you're in the Hackett house, you've got the werewolf showdown, which is, the thing is with this chapter is that on paper, a lot of it sounds absolutely great. But as Liam said, there's also like lots of filler as well, like whether it's sort of like the Emma bit in the basement or like the lead up to the scrapyard. Even when you're in Hackett house, you've got like the Bobby Ryan thing, haven't you, where he's chasing him, and you've got Jedediah chasing Laura. In both of those chases, unlike the Emma chase or the Abby chase, I never felt on edge. And I guess it's partly because I was a little bit displaced, because I was literally trusting these Hacketts for like the vast majority of the game. Now they've suddenly turned on you, and for some reason I still didn't buy them as like a major threat, in terms of like them being able to actually kill you. But as like Liam said, like there are some like really good things in this. Like you've got the Constance thing, her head getting blown off. Scrapyard scene, it is one of the highlights of the game if you can ignore that the few minutes build up to it. And then going from there, obviously, yeah, there is like the werewolf showdown, like as just an action thing to watch. It's great seeing how things can play out, like with just by Ryan going for the gun or not even not firing the gun. You can get like completely different endings, as we'd all know. But yeah, I just feel like the problem with it is that like as I said before, on paper what you play sounds great, but I didn't feel that sense of excitement and thrill that I feel like I should have done for those particular moments that I've just laid out. So that's why I almost leant towards Chapter 2 in the end, because there was just some nice sort of feel good stuff in there, some nice character drama, and at that point I've just naturally felt a little bit more engaged with the plot. But I think honestly what you said before, mate, about it being sandwiched in between two pretty poor chapters, I feel like does hold some like levity to it as well. Okay, so of course guys, our gold medal does go to Chapter 2, titled Truth or Dare. Now this is my favourite chapter. It might surprise a few because obviously it is towards the beginning of the game, but I feel like this is the chapter where we've got some nice locations. I feel like some of the character dramas are really cool, especially when you talk about Jacob and Emma, like when they're exploring around the shop, like looking for supplies. You're quite excited, like as a player, like you know that there's a party coming, so there's like a little bit of anticipation. There's a nice dynamic between Dylan and Ryan in Mr. Hackett's office, and again you're doing like a little bit of investigative digging with like the whole trap door, and you can like go and find like his little secret, as what Dylan calls his like little sort of dungeon thing, his little sex dungeon. But you can like see like his little secret office where he's got like the the CCTV, which again raises intrigue. And I think that's my point. Like when I'm comparing to Chapter 9, this is the point in the game, and it sort of happens again with like the Truth or Dare sequence where I'm sat there thinking, ooh, where could this go? Like now that this revelation's happened, now that these character dynamics have taken shape, where could the plot go? Whereas I think like with Chapter 9, it's sort of like you knew it was coming to a close, and like some of the actiony things didn't quite land. Also, like just as a nice little side order, we've got like the peanut butter pops thing, the little contest between Jacob and Nick, which again it's sort of like that macho thing, two guys like trying to show off against like just to impress a girl basically. But again, it serves as a nice way to look at the game and sort of like how to shoot essentially. And then beyond that, there's the Nick and Abby scene. So like I feel like what ultimately wins this round is you're in nice locations, and there's real like character stuff going on in this chapter, and it ends on a really good cliffhanger as well, where you've got characters storming off, and then you've got the Hacketts overlooking it, so you really do think, well, what could happen next?
And yeah, a very worthy contender and placement for the gold medal, I feel. Although the fact that I did put Chapter 9 as my gold, I did just completely agree with Jack. A lot of the points he just mentioned, I completely agree with. And I think it's just the fact that, like I mentioned in my last, one for Chapter 9, it's just benefited by the fact that it's in the earlier stages, which is the stronger half of the Quarry game. Chapter 2 is obviously sandwiched between two strong chapters in Chapter 1 and 3. It's at the part of the game where, you're excited to play it before your enthusiasm might get dwindled at the latter half. So something I just really like about this whole dynamic of this chapter is just the fact that you explore 3 different relationships or friendships of them parting to get items for the party. It's just cool the way they did that. And then at the end, they all blend together for a bit of a shootout with remarkable fruit killing skills and the epic game of Truth or Dare, which is just funny and awesome and just, like really nice to see. And it just splits off all the characters to where they need to be, which really sets the game off. I just think the Truth or Dare scene to me is probably the most memorable scene in the game after, or not joint with, the scrapyard scene to me. It's just super memorable. The dialogue's fun, and it's just really cool just to see these fun bunch of characters we've just been introduced to get all this airtime, where we get to find out a lot about them in a really interesting dynamic of this game, which I'm sure Jack and I can relate to, as we played bunch of these games at uni, so that was cool to see. But yeah, to me the thing that really sells it is just the fact that the relationships and the dynamics group off and split, and then it just allows them to get their individual growth. So I didn't really have any negatives to give this one. If I could, it could just be the generic thing of saying it doesn't really get into the nitty-gritty of the story yet. So yeah, guys, that is our ranking for the Quarry chapters. Please let us know in the comments what your rankings were, and tell us what you thought of our rankings.
This was really fun to do, and of course if you do like this video, guys, we will do it for Until Dawn as well in the future. It was a tough ask, and maybe you can help us like try to work out what you sort of want. Do you want it to be more in terms of enjoyment? Do you want it to be in terms of choices? Maybe a bit of both? Let us know in the comments, and like Liam said, let us know your rankings as well.
40,000 likes in the comments, guys, and we will do an Until Dawn version.
I don't think you have the facilities for that, big man. You understand?
Thank you very much. We'll see you in the next one.
Catch you later.